And now, the Lowdown, with economist and political strategist Elson Low.
Good evening, folks. Good evening. Welcome to the Lowdown. I'm your host, Elson Low. Thank you for starting your Saturday night on a high with Elson Low. It's good to have you here always. It's good to have a laugh with you always. We're gonna have a fun show tonight. We're gonna have an interesting show tonight. We're gonna cover some areas that have been caused a certain degree of controversy over the past week or so, and that's really regarding the cost of living and inflation and these types of worrisome things. But of course, you know, we like to cover everything in a humorous and entertaining fashion. So we invite you to share the link, folks. Let's try and get as many people as possible looking at the show. Let's try and spread the message as much as possible. And we hope that you guys will be able to really enjoy tonight's show. It's going to be fun, entertaining, interesting. We're going to go over some headlines. There's quite a few headlines regarding cost of living. Going to show you some fun graphs. Of course, we've covered some graphs before on this show, but it's going to be good, folks. It's going to be good. We're going to speak with City Councillor Ian Bollers. He's going to be here to speak with us later on in the show. And then we, as always, like to give young people in Guyana a sense of the ways in which you can benefit as the oil and gas economy picks up. And really a sense of how some people have been benefiting hugely in a massive way from the changes to our economy. So I'm going to give you a sense of how they've been doing that, and hopefully that will be of use to you. So that is essentially the way that we want to break down the show tonight. We're first going to talk about the cost of living and inflation issue. Then we're going to talk with Councillor Ian Bollers, and then we're going to talk a bit about how you can position yourself to benefit and what are some of the things to look out for as our economy expands. Folks, share the link. Let's try and get everyone online tonight. Let's try and give everyone an opportunity to watch the show, to enjoy having a laugh with us. It's Saturday night. Start your Saturday on a high with Elson Low. And of course, we always have a good little laugh. We go through some of the memes of the week. We don't have that many memes today, so we're actually going to go through some headlines. But the headlines are unfortunately similarly entertaining. So that's what we're going to do. We've seen in the past week or so the cost of living issue resurface. It's something that I don't have to tell you is a very serious issue that has affected so many people. But it would appear that the government doesn't see it as really a priority issue, and as a result, we're not seeing any kind of robust response from them. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what really should happen to try and address this cost of living issue, what other countries have been doing to address it, and how we can mirror them. And in some cases, we've already made efforts to mirror them, but the efforts need to be robust efforts so that we can actually bring prices down, or at least help people to be able to live at a comfortable level with these higher prices. So we're gonna chat about all of these things. We're going to go into a bit of depth on some of them, give you a sense of it internationally, as well as locally, folks. So we're going to give you more than one perspective, which is good to have on these things. It's not an issue that's confined to Guyana, but at the same time, we here in Guyana need to respond to it as the fastest growing country in the world. One would expect our response to be a robust response, folks. We would expect to see a big response, not the types of lukewarm responses we've seen so far from the government. So share the link. Let's try and get everyone in. Let's try and give everyone an opportunity to see these interesting things. We're going to also talk a bit about inequality, and I'm going to give you a measure of that to help you get a sense of how it has changed in only a few short years. But we have some very disturbing questions around inequality in the country, and we've not seen the government list inequality as one of their primary development priorities. And when I say inequality, I mean reducing inequality or keeping it at a minimal level. We've not seen that as a priority for the government, so it's an issue that really does need to be discussed. Of course, we've got a very large portion of the population that lives in very difficult circumstances. It's one of the poorest countries in terms of those at the lower end of the income scale in this hemisphere. It's been for a while. But at the same time, we're seeing massive growth in Guyana, unbelievable levels of growth. So we want to ensure that everyone is able to benefit from that. So we're going to chat a bit about that, give you again some perspective so that going forward you have a sense of how the economy is changing, what needs to be done, and what is not being done. So thanks again, folks, for tuning in tonight. Remember to share that link. We're going to have an entertaining time as always. It's going to be a laugh as always. Thank you for joining us. So starting your Saturday night on a high. So share the link, folks. Share the link. We're going to just jump into one or two of these just quick issues as we start off the night. Share that link. Let's get things going. So let's get the first slide up, which is we always try to talk about some of these house prices and things like that we've seen in the country, and it's something that is an issue that has come up, and it's something that we're going to chat about in a little bit. We're going to chat about the housing issue, and we're going to put up in a minute a picture of a house where someone made some specific comments on it that were a bit questionable, a bit troubling. So we're gonna have that quick conversation, and we're gonna lean into that really quickly, and that's going to be something that we have a good discussion around. That we have a good discussion around. That's going to, I think, be very interesting to you. So when we can get that image up, we'll look at that. There you go. Okay, so we've got a house here. It's an entire house with, I believe it's $300,000. Rent is the asking rent. However, the person renting the house has indicated that they don't want any Cubans there, which is pretty troubling. We've seen a lot of people migrate to the country. I mean, I suppose it's pretty funny that they're bold enough to put right on their advertisement that they don't want any Cubans. But on the other end of it, it's really unfortunate that people would say something like that. Someone had made a comment that how would you feel if you went to a foreign country and you saw a sign that said no Guyanese? Very disturbing. So this is, it's something that we're going to see more and more in terms of a lot of foreign folks coming into Guyana and renting properties, maybe not Cubans, but other people from various other countries that want to be involved in the growing oil and gas industry. And the downside of that is it creates a bit of local tension. But of course, we want to create an open environment as much as we want to ensure that Guyanese are the primary beneficiaries of what belongs to them. So that's something that came up. Very unfortunate to see that. As a result, we've got, I think, a negative reaction that came out of that, and quite understandable negative reaction. So that's the one thing we wanted to throw up. Of course, we've thrown up various hilarious examples of housing in Guyana, what's happening with housing in Guyana, which are very, very concerning. Let's get the next slide up. Okay, so we've got gas prices on the rise again. This is something that we saw a spike after the war in Ukraine. We're seeing these gas prices rise again, almost as high as they had risen during that conflict, and that's because gasoline has continued its march upward, and we'll go into that in a second. Has continued its unfortunate march upward, as time goes on and as economies reopen after the COVID-19 pandemic gradually eases out of the picture. So that's something that we've seen, and it's very unfortunate that gas prices are again higher. Of course, what this means for the average citizen is that inflation will be higher. The price that you pay both at the pump and for various goods will be higher. I'm not sure that the government is able to do much more when it comes to the tax, because I believe they've already lowered that tax all the way down. But let's see, maybe there's a further adjustment that can be made. However, maybe the government there should be a commitment towards keeping that gasoline level within a reasonable range, as it is indeed a huge problem in terms of cost of living. Now, the other thing to remember always, my fellow Guyanese, is that unlike most other countries which do not produce oil, we produce oil. And as a result of producing oil, you would think that we would have some additional capacity to ease people's burdens for these types of temporary shocks, which we are seeing right now. Remember, Guyanese won't be consuming that many barrels of oil, but the country is obviously producing huge amounts, and that production is going through the roof. We've seen Exxon actually say that they're going to be bringing forward their production, for the next FPSO from 2024 to 2023, so that next year you're going to see another big jump in the amount of production, in the barrels of oil of production that we have in Guyana. So this is something to keep your eye on. It's very concerning, but we wanted to also give you a perspective on it over time, because you may think to yourself, oh, well, this is just one-off. Maybe gas prices will drop again in the near future. But let's get some perspective. So let's go into the next image there. Okay, so now you've got gas prices over the course of the last, I believe that's the last 3 months. You'll notice that big spike. There was a big spike there. That's right after the war in Ukraine began. And there was talk of there being sanctions on Russian oil exports. Now, those sanctions are indeed coming to pass. So that's something that we are indeed seeing. And what you can really observe from that graph, apart from the horrible spikes that I think will certainly frighten even the bravest of consumer, is that the graph is a march upward. It is a direct march upward. And as a result of that, that's indicating that the price will continue to go up. Good for us in terms of revenue, bad for consumers. So the question is, what is the government going to do to mitigate these problems? But this isn't just a short-term phenomenon. Let's get the next shot. And this is it over a 6-month period. So, now you're seeing it over a longer period of time. Okay. Again, you've got an upward march all the way through, an upward march. I would say it's a roller coaster, but it doesn't seem to be much down in that roller coaster, only up. That's unfortunate. You've got several skyscrapers in there, and for consumers, that's just bad news. For Guyanese, for Guyana as a producer, that's great news. And we're seeing the Natural Resources Fund balloon increase quite a lot. But if those and none of those monies are put towards cost of living mitigation, and in fact less than 1% of the national budget has been put towards cost of living mitigation, we'll get into all that a bit later, viewers. We'll get into all that a bit later, and all of the way that the government seems to be either totally ignoring or completely have missed what needs to be done in these circumstances. But that's the upward march. Let's get the next slide up. So that's going to give you an even longer term perspective. So that's looking all through the pandemic. You see the drop that happened during the pandemic. And then you see this march higher and higher prices. That is a steady march that's lasted for over a year. It's very concerning. And that high level of oil price coincides with a high level of inflation, high level of prices for a wide range of goods. Because remember, oil is used as a fuel for the production of a wide variety of items. You're also going to see things like fertilizer and so on, which are connected to the petroleum industry, affected by the increase in the price of oil and gas of oil. You'll see plane tickets affected by the price of by the increase in the oil price. So these are all really concerning elements of this entire process. Of course, as an oil producer here in Guyana, we're happy to see things go up, but we're only happy to see that if consumers are able to also benefit. That is to say, if we see mitigation of this inflation at the local level, because otherwise, what's going to happen? Consumers are going to be suffering. Of course, I'll gently point out that the minimum wage has not been raised. The minimum wage, which has been around for several years, has not been raised in the midst of all of this cost of living crisis, and in the midst of the fact that we in Guyana are actually producing oil and growing at the fastest rate in the entire world. So you've got a lot of growth. We're benefiting from the oil industry, but consumers are feeling the brunt of this cost of living surge, and the government is not doing anything about it. Of course, as I always say, I have a dark sense of humor, but this is maybe a little bit too dark. So that's what we're seeing right now when it comes to the oil industry, and it really raises the question what the government should be doing. To try and further mitigate these things. We've seen some actions, some of which have been relatively effective, like cutting the tax on gasoline. That's been relatively effective. But other actions, like some of the other tax cuts, where it's not clear that there's been any positive effect. So that's something that I think has concerned quite a lot of people, and rightfully so. And at the same time, not seeing that minimum wage rise, even though it's been approved by I believe there's a tripartite committee that's supposed to look at these things. Has already approved it. It's sitting before cabinet now to be approved, but for some reason they haven't approved it. Maybe they've run out of pens there, and they need some pens. If somebody could kindly send them some so that they can pass off on the order, sign off on the order, that I think would be appreciated by many citizens. So that's unfortunate there. Let's go on to the next slide, because the cost of living nightmare continues on. So this is an article from the Wall Street Journal, which looks at it internationally, and it's emphasizing that for developing countries, cost of living issues are particularly acute. In fact, according to them, soaring food prices, this is a quote from them, are triggering shortages and protests across the developing world, as disruption from the Ukraine war adds to existing strains on global supply of grains, meat, and other foodstuffs. India recently, on Saturday, invoked a rare ban on wheat exports to help tame domestic prices, a move likely to exacerbate global strains. The country is the world's second largest wheat grower, behind China. Late last month, Indonesia halted the export of certain types of palm oil, edible oils, in an effort to lower the local prices. Indonesia is also a large producer of palm oil, I believe. So what we're seeing is countries across the world try to combat these higher prices, but the way that they're combating them is often through these types of export controls. Now, we've seen the government mention that they would like to grow wheat in Guyana in order to lower the price of flour, and I mentioned two small things, a couple small things. The first being, if the government is going to do that, they have to ban the exportation of wheat, because if it is going to be exported, then what will happen is the price will be exactly the same as the price of the wheat that we're bringing in. The farmers will charge the same price because they're looking to make the most profit. That's a normal expectation. So it won't actually help in terms of price. They have to actually ban us from exporting the wheat. Point number one. Point number two, wheat produced across the world is going to be produced very efficiently by large corporations. If we cannot produce wheat as efficiently as that, then that means that the wheat that we produce would actually be more expensive than the wheat in the international market. So again, that would not be particularly helpful. And then the last thing is the wheat that we're producing is, well, the two things, is going to be using fertilizers, where the price has gone up. Again, that's not going to be helpful. And then, of course, if the government has indicated that they want to produce wheat in Regionate, which is, as many of you may be aware, the other side of Guyana. And if you're going to be producing wheat at the other side of Guyana, you have to get this wheat to market. You have to transport it. And Regionate, unfortunately, is not known for having the most roads, or even many roads, in areas that will allow for mass amounts of agricultural production. So if you're not going to have that, the question is, how are we going to get the wheat out in a cost-effective way? I say all this to say that seems to me not to be the best move by the government. And to top it all off, while we've got this crisis right now, with wheat prices going up as much as 40%, um, the earliest that we might get these wheat products, I can only imagine, is several months, maybe more than a year down the road. So it would seem to me that this is not going to be coming in time to assist anybody, but it makes for good headlines and whatnot. So the government maybe making a bit of a blunder there. I think maybe a bit of a misstep. So that's some concerning. Those are some concerning things that we're seeing. Cooking oil is the other thing which is gone through the roof, and that is has really affected a lot of people. A lot of people. But let's ask ourselves how other countries are responding to this. So let's get a look at some of the other headlines that have come out of this. So we've got the UK's Boris Johnson first off saying that fears about inflation are unfounded, saying that there's no reason to think that. And then let's get the next slide up. Then we've got him a few months later saying that he never said that, even though he was caught on tape saying that fears about inflation are unfounded. And this, I think, raises an interesting question, which is whether more right-wing governments like Boris Johnson's versus more left-wing governments like those you might see in France or the UK are taking a different approach to the inflation issue. Of course, I would term Guyana's government as much more right-wing than many other governments. That focuses on taxes and so on. That tends to be much more of a right-wing, lowering taxes, tends to be much more of a right-wing way to look at things. And so what you're seeing from a lot of right-wing governments is a bit of denial that these things are even important. Let's get the next slide up to kind of stress this point a little bit. So now we're hearing from good old Boris that there's no magic bullet to deal with inflation. You just kind of have to bear it. Nothing that can be done. When you see that the government has not passed any supplemental budget after the Ukraine war broke out to address the cost of living issue, doesn't it kind of feel to you like they're saying something similar to that? You just kind of have to bear it as Guyanese. There's not going to be progress on the cost of living issue. Seems to me that the natural thing to do when the Ukraine conflict created so much more cost of living woes was to pass a supplemental budget to deal with it. Unless the government is making the claim that they anticipated the Ukraine war, unless the government is making the claim that they anticipated the Ukraine war and anticipated the cost of living effects, and therefore the $5 billion that was put aside for cost of living mitigation is enough to deal with all of that. And so it seems to me that would be quite a prediction, and that even in those circumstances, $5 billion, less than 1% of the national budget. Remember, we passed the biggest budget in the country's history by some distance recently. The biggest budget, only less than 1% put towards cost of living. And then now we've got the Ukraine war. No additional funds for cost of living. So is it not a priority? Is that the way that we should think about it? And so it would seem to me that is the message that's being communicated. Cost of living just isn't really a priority. Funds just really aren't going to be put towards it. If you're punishing, the government seems to think that you're going to have to be on your own. Times are hard, just like Mr. Johnson is saying. There's no magic bullet to deal with it. However, let's contrast that with a couple of other countries. Let's look at the next slide. Let's contrast that with a couple other countries' approach to these things. So you've got, this is Macron, this is in France, the newly re-elected Emmanuel Macron. He's saying that there's going to be a cashback, basically compensation to help people to make it through this period of elevated inflation. So he's first of all acknowledging that there is a problem, and second of all, dealing with the problem in a large scale way. So that seems to me to be the way to address address the most important issue, in my view, in Guyana right now and internationally right now. So that's what's being done there. And let's get another shot, the next shot up. Okay, so now you've got President Biden indicating that his top domestic priority, is the inflationary issue, the cost of living issue. That's his top domestic priority. So it seems to me that there are more left-leaning governments that are taking much more pride in putting much more focus on this issue, and some of these right-wing governments seem to be trying to ignore the issue and pretend as if it's a non-issue. So that's, to me, colors or gives you a sense of the approach right now in Guyana. It's not a big issue. We don't need a supplemental budget. We had endless supplemental budgets over the course of the last year or so. But for this issue, one of the biggest issues in the entire world, where presidents from all over, our left-wing presidents, are seriously considering what can be done, we are taking it light. Nothing much needed. We're being dramatic when we talk about cost of living, and so it's nothing to bother with. That seems to be the impression that the government is looking to convey here, which is a very, very concerning impression, I think, for pretty much all Guyanese. But that brings us to the question, on the other end of things, as to what really can be done. What really can be done to try and affect these, to try and improve this situation. So what I want to do is throw up a quick video with President Biden, just talking about the cost of living issue. And once we've got that up, you'll be able to get a sense of it and a sense of some of the measures. We'll take a look at some of those and how they line up with the things recommended by the PNCR and the things that have been done more broadly currently in Guyana.
I know the families all across America are hurting because of inflation. I understand what it feels like. I come from a family where when the price of gas or food went up, we felt it. It was a discussion at the kitchen table. I want every American to know that I'm taking inflation very seriously, and it's my top domestic priority. And I'm here today to talk about solutions, and there's going to be more we're going to have to talk about as well. But first, I want us to be crystal clear about the problem. There are two leading causes of inflation we're seeing today. The first cause of inflation is a once-in-a-century pandemic. Not only did it shut down our global economy, it threw the supply chains and demand completely out of whack, especially in countries where more effective recovery responses weren't available, especially in those sectors that rely on semiconductors. These supply challenges have been further hampered by the onset of Delta and Omicron viruses. And you've all seen it, you've all felt it. And this year we have a second cause, Mr. Putin's war in Ukraine. We saw in March that 60% of inflation that month was due to price increases at the pump for gasoline. Putin's war has raised food prices as well, because Ukraine and Russia, two of the world's major bread baskets for wheat and corn, are essentially completely stalled. Ukraine has 20 million tons of grain in storage in silos right now. They're trying to figure out how to get out of the country and to market, which would reduce prices around the world. Normally we'd have already begun to export them into the market. But it hasn't because of Putin's invasion. So we're working with our European partners to get this food out into the world so they could help bring down prices. But it's difficult because, again, of Putin and the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Okay. So you get some context there as to how the issue is being looked at in the U.S. You get a little bit of a sense of what's going on. Now that you have a sense of what's going on, it can kind of give you some perspective as to what those who take inflation and those who take the cost of living issue seriously think, and what those who don't particularly seem to take it seriously are thinking. What we're seeing by the U.S. is a robust response because they appreciate The scale of the issue, what we're seeing in France is again a robust response because they appreciate the scale of the issue. What we're seeing in more right-leaning countries is that there's not such a response. Maybe that's because they have business interests that they don't want to annoy. Perhaps that may be something that those governments are doing. So let's be more concrete. Let's be a bit more concrete as to what can be done, and we'll give you a quick sense of that. So the first, let's get the next slide up there. So the first thing is, the U.S. government has talked about what they're doing regarding infrastructure and supply chains. Really, this is just to ensure that there can be easy transportation of goods, swift transportation of goods, so that we can bring down the cost of freight. We in Guyana have removed our taxation on freight, so that's something that is supposed to be useful. There's a question as to whether or not that has been effective at combating inflation locally, or whether we should have given a more direct compensation the way that other countries have done, in the way that other countries have done. Let's look at the next slide there. So the next thing that is I think something to consider is that there's an effort to boost agricultural production. This is something that we've spoken about in the PNCR. We've spoken about small businesses, about putting aside $5 billion to assist small businesses. Of course, small farmers would benefit from that. We've talked about increasing food security in the various regions. The purpose of all of these policies really is to ensure that we can grow the amount of production so that we can push the price down because there's more food that is available. What we're seeing is a bit of a shortage across the world, and we're trying to expand the amount of food available so that Guyanese do not have to face the brunt of these high prices. Garlic, shallot, all these things that have come up in the past, where you've seen various memes and jokes on it. All the girls they want the garlic. I'm out with the garlic is one example. So these are things that we've come across that we don't want to come across, and so the solution that's been proposed by the PNCR in many ways mirrors the solution that's been proposed in the U.S. And it's a way that we can help to fight the inflationary pressure. There are other solutions, of course, but that's one of the key measures to consider. Now, from that, moving off from that, what we also need to keep in mind is that, again, it's not possible for us to really have any robust response if we don't have a supplementary budget to add or to create that response. We haven't accounted for that, barely put any monies aside for it. We're seeing these 800 jobs there, 1,000 jobs there. But these jobs that the government is proposing are only providing you a small income, number one. And number two, it seems to me that it's not just that 800 people that are suffering from cost of living woes, but that the broader population is suffering from that. So I wouldn't describe that as a meaningful way to deal with the issue by the government. So that's what we've noticed there. The other side of it, of course, we've mentioned is that there's a real need to raise the minimum wage, which has not been raised. And as a result, we've continued to see people at the lower end of the income scale really be squeezed, which is totally unacceptable. But one way that we can also look at what's been going on is from the flip side. I talk quite a bit about the way that the country's economy has grown. The country's economy has grown so substantially. And as a result of that, I just want to hammer home some points about the way that inequality really has started to affect Guyana. The Guyanese stock market is one that has been performing incredibly well in the past few years. In fact, from 2018 to now, it has gone up 500%. It has gotten 5 times larger over the course of just a few years. However, it's generally the consensus among economists and other experts in Guyana that the ownership of stock in Guyana is very low. Many people in the population don't own stock, especially those on the lower end of the income scale don't own stock and perhaps don't even know what stock is. A stock essentially is just a share of ownership of a company, which entitles you to sometimes voting rights, but typically to some of the profits of a company. So we've got big corporations in Guyana that have been quite profitable, that have seen their assets grow, that have seen their stock price go through the roof. So the value of the entire company is much higher. But at the same time, we've not seen the minimum wage come up. So what we've seen is that those at the lower end of the income scale have the same income, minimum wage is the same, but the stock price of these companies has gone up 5 times over. And so if you are someone who has stock, and this is the wealthier people in the society who have stock, your wealth has gotten 5 times as large. 5 times as large. And so by this measure of inequality, in just a few short years, the gap between the poorest citizens and the wealthiest citizens has gotten 5 times bigger in just a few years. That's what's really going on in terms of inequality in this country. The gap has gotten 5 times bigger in just a few short years. This is very disturbing. It's very concerning. And it really raises the question as to what kind of a society we want. Of course, we in the PNCR believe that inequality is an important issue, believe that it's important for us to grow together as a society. And that is, of course, something that is reflected in our policies and something you can always look at. As I mentioned earlier in the program, the PPP has not listed combating growing inequality as a priority in their development framework. It's not an issue for them. It is an issue for us, and we want to ensure that all Guyanese are the beneficiary of this growth, are the beneficiaries of this growth. And I'll close with an interesting question for you. How much tax do you think that those who've benefited from this huge increase in their wealth, how much tax do you think they've had to pay? Of course, they get a share of the profits called dividends. Is that taxed? Of course, the actual stock has gone up. Is that taxed? Fellow Guyanese, they have paid exactly $0 in tax because that is not taxed. That form of income is not taxed in Guyana at all. So as a result, whereas the ordinary person who is struggling on minimum wage has not seen their wealth grow, some of the wealthiest people in Guyana have seen their wealth skyrocket 5 times over, and they haven't had to pay a cent in tax. On that note, viewers, we're going to bring on our guest tonight, Councillor Ian Bollers. He's here and ready to join us. Ian, how are you doing tonight?
Hi, good night, Elson. I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So if you can just give our viewers, we try to keep it light on the Lowdown. We try to keep things light and breezy, light and relaxed. It's a Saturday night. Just give our viewers a sense of where you're from and what constituency you're connected with within the City Council.
All right. So my constituency is constituency 8. And that is basically working Ross, Workmanville areas. Basically, I've been at the council for the past, 3+ years now. As you know, we hasn't had local government election last year. So we're rolling over into another year, which will make this my 4th year as a councillor. Apart from that, I am also, I should say, helping out, so to speak, in the mayor's constituency, which is constituency 1.
Okay.
All right. So the council runs by committees. Of course, the council is the main local government body that does administering of the affairs of the city, which would include services like garbage collection and stuff like that.
Okay, sure. Well, thank you for giving us a little bit of insight into the role that you play and within the council. But of course, what we like to do on this show is we'll ask you some unusual and funny questions. So brace yourself. The first one we've
Sure,
got
go
for
ahead.
you. The first one we've got for you tonight is what is your least favorite food?
Oh, that's
Mm,
actually an hard one.
yeah,
uh,
we've
I
we've had
like
interesting
a lot
answers.
of diverse food, so it's kind of an hard one.
We've had some interesting
Mm,
answers. Someone has said soda is their least favorite food, which I thought was a surprise. I think the most, yeah, right?
um, definitely not soda. Mm, probably
Uh,
Corolla.
there we go, there we go, there we go. That's what we've heard. We've heard that one before. I keep expecting everyone to say Corella, but I've heard some other ones that have been surprising. Okay, so Corella is your least favorite. You and the rest of Guyana. Um, there's another one for you. What movie or TV show have you rewatched the most? You can't get enough of it. You put it on over and over. It's in replay all the time. It's your favorite thing to see. Movie or TV show that you've rewatched the most. You can't say Home Alone, because I think that's one that everybody has rewatched Home Alone
No,
more times than they would
I
like like to
no,
share.
I'm kind of a big science fan. Anything to
Right.
do with space, I'm there. So
Okay.
definitely like Star Trek.
Okay. Got ourselves a trekker here. Yeah, that's good. I am a fan as well of Star Trek. They're. It's definitely a very different type of show, I would say. It's much more about asking strange questions about. It's almost got a philosophical vibe, as opposed to just being an action adventure show. So it's a very unusual show. Who's your favorite captain? I know that's a question there. You got Picard, you got Kirk. I don't want to lead you. Who's your favorite captain? My favorite is Kirk.
Well,
I'll
well, you
give you
just called him in. Well, one of them.
that. Say
Yeah.
that again. Okay, sure. Okay. And are you a big fan of Spock? Yeah, so I find that most
I
people really
am
like him.
actually, yeah. I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. All right. So we're rolling through. What is your least favorite vacation or trip? Might have been one where it rained all day long, or where the trip was extremely long and the bus break down with you, where you end up on the trail and you couldn't get out of the mud. What's your least favorite trip or vacation?
Well, actually, I remember going to Linden once with my cousins, a few friends, and my little brother. And actually, it kind of was a good trip, but we end up stuck in mud. The car got stuck in mud, of course. By
Yeah,
the
yeah,
time we
yeah.
were finished, our entire clothes were, full with mud. Yeah.
Wow, wow,
We look
that's
like we went to the back dam or something. But
tough.
it actually was fun. But
Okay. So mixed bag, a bit of a mixed bag. I get you. That's uh,
yeah,
that's a tough one though, man. Covered in mud. That
yeah.
doesn't sound like fun to me. Okay, wow.
But
All
that
right.
is what made yeah, that is what made it adventurous,
Yeah,
part of the fun.
well, unfortunately, I think that's been the experience of many Guyanese on the trail to Letem and to a lot of these interior areas where the roads are pretty incredible. So
Yeah.
okay, interesting. Here's another strange one to catch your fancy. What's the largest crowd that you've ever been in? The largest crowd that you've ever been in. What comes to mind as
Hmm.
the biggest crowd that you've ever been in? Could be any. It could have been a
Mm.
concert. It could have been cricket. It could have been a march. What's the biggest crowd that you've ever
That's
been in?
that's kind of an hard one also. because cricket, of course, draw thousands. When I've been to cricket many times,
Okay.
I've been to concerts.
Okay. This
So
man gets around.
probably it's a mixture,
Sure. Okay. Sure.
but of
Sure.
course I wouldn't know which one was the biggest.
Mm. Which, well, I suppose I could ask which one felt the biggest, but I don't know if if you could tell that, if you could tell that either. Okay, cool.
Probably a concert, because once I was at a concert and the stadium, the ground was filled, and also the stands had a lot of people. So probably that was the biggest.
Yeah, that sounds pretty big. That sounds definitely like it might be the biggest. Okay, sure. Sounds
It
like
was
fun.
a few years ago. I think it was Neo or one of those concerts, but it was a while ago.
Okay. So it sounds like it was a wild time. I know sometimes when you go with some friends to those big concerts, you and the friends arrive, but you split up and you can't find them back. Too many people, you
Very
know.
true. Very
Yeah,
true.
yeah, yeah. Okay. And one of the things we also like to ask, which is changing tact a bit, is what's your biggest hope for the future of Guyana? Something that you're really optimistic about, that you're really looking forward to, that you want to see play out in the country's future. What's your biggest hope for Guyana? And you can mention any different area that you'd like, but that's something that I think as I said, we talk about a positive tone. Try to keep it light on this
Yeah.
this particular show. So, what's something that you're looking forward to in Guyana?
All right. So, definitely one of them is national unity, of course, because national unity will obviously help in terms of the development of our country. So, definitely national unity. As we know, we're on I should say on the rise economically, with the introduction of oil in our economy. Um, that definitely will have a major effect on our country. So
Sure.
national unity, sharing the resources equally among the population.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as you know, we several things needs to happen for us to realize that development, like cheap electricity, of course, a deep water port is important. The road to Brazil, that's a major one
Sure.
also in terms of um, the development process of our country. We've been talking about that road for years and years and years, and it hasn't been realized as yet, but I'm hopeful that our road will um, be completed because, as you know, the connection to Brazil, um,
Yeah.
northern Brazil, would like an avenue out to the sea, which
Yeah.
coming through Guyana would be a shorter avenue out to the sea. So a lot
Absolutely.
of goods would be passing through Guyana and we would gain revenues, not only, like in the trucking industry. Um, it would be good if we can get a real system connecting
Yeah.
Brazil to Guyana, of course. That would
Yeah.
be faster.
Yeah. I agree.
Revenues, immigration, services, stuff like that. And,
Yeah.
food and everything. There's a lot of connecting industries to just that simple road.
Yeah. I
So,
completely agree.
I'm very excited about the development prospects of Guyana.
Good. And that's I think the attitude we have to take. We want to be excited. We want to push for development as much as we have our concerns about a certain group of people that seem hell bent on thieving out the oil money. But in the meantime, yeah, we're going to continue to push for progress in the country. Ian, thank you for being on tonight. We've had a nice, insightful chat, and we appreciate your time.
And thank you for having me, Elson.
Great. All right. You have a good rest of the night, and we'll have you on later down the road.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was Councillor Jan Bollers. He's sharing his thoughts regarding Guyana's development. And, we like to keep it light. We like to have a chat here on the Lowdown. And so that was a very interesting one. Now, at the end of the program, we always want to talk a bit about Guyana's development and how you can position yourself, what the changes are, especially for young people. What are some of the big things that have taken place? Of course, in this show, I've mentioned the massive growth of Guyana's stock market. Of course, I'm not saying that you should invest, but I do want to point out that wealthier people in this country have been able to make huge sums, and that has been in a tax-free way. So take from that what you will, but that seems to be an avenue that some people have benefited from very substantially. Just to give you a sense of it, if you had 200,000 US invested in the Guyanese stock market, of course, that's a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but you'd have $1 million US right now. So that's nothing to sniff at. That's very, very good performance. And then, of course, you get your dividends as well, also not taxed. So that's a great area of benefit. We've talked a bit about housing before on this show. Just want to reiterate some of the math around that and housing, especially in the Georgetown area. Now you've got the Private Sector Commission saying that rent around Georgetown in higher end areas has tripled. This has also impacted rent in the other areas, which is, I think, understandable. And that as a result of that, we've seen housing prices go through the roof. In fact, a young man that I know to myself to be doing quite well and with a good job has recently mentioned to me that he's having trouble purchasing a house around Georgetown. It's so expensive. So if he's having trouble, then it's tough for the average Guyanese. I think that much is clear. And as a result of that, we're seeing some real difficult times for consumers. Now, that tripling, housing prices tend to go in co with GDP. Sometimes they're a little bit lower. Sometimes the connection isn't as strong, but in areas that are high end, it'll be the strongest. So you'll see as GDP grows, housing prices grow. BBC had estimated that Guyana will grow between 300% and 1,000% over the course of until we reach the 2025, maybe 2026. If we've seen housing prices triple already, that means that we've passed the 300% scale of things and we've headed towards the 1,000% scale. So it's a very real possibility that we'll see housing prices continue their march up if that estimate continues. So it's something that Guyanese should keep in mind. And if you're on the lower end of the income scale, it's definitely poses a challenge for you. And the advice that I've offered before is regarding if you can move out of the city and live someplace close to transportation. That would probably be the most effective way that you can avoid having to pay higher prices, because of course the oil and gas workers want to live in the best areas, and that's going to have a big impact on Georgetown, very big impact. Now these oil and gas workers, we've given you on this show a sense of how much you earn in the oil and gas industry internationally. We wanted to ground that a bit more, give you a bit more specificity in the local market. Of course, we would only be able to share what has been shared with us. We don't have them coming out with quotes, but it seems that for entry-level positions, you can estimate, or it's an estimate that I've come up with is 400,000 to 450,000 for entry-level positions. I remind you that the minimum wage is about $44,000. So we're looking at 10 times the minimum wage for entry-level positions. So that's a chunk of change right there. And that for the oil and gas service companies, which are companies that are connected to the oil and gas industry, but not necessarily your large companies, your main companies, you may be getting an entry level of about $250,000 a month. which is again pretty substantial. Again, far higher than the minimum wage and much higher than most Guyanese would earn. So that's something to keep in mind. If you were looking at for a way that you can really benefit, the thing to do, I suppose, would be to get a job in the oil and gas sector, and then to live outside of the city, very close to transport. And in fact, when I was at a high-paying job in the States, what we did to save money, those of us who were really trying to save as much as we could, is that we would make sure that we had a sense of the transportation routes around, and try to get an apartment that, while it may be, or a house, while it may be far out of the city, is very, very close to the transportation route. That allows you to minimize some of your transportation timings. And as a result of minimizing that, it kind of functions in the same way that a house that is closer, much closer to the city, much closer to your job area would function. So it's cheaper generally in terms of rent, but it is better because it is so close to the actual transportation system itself. We've also mentioned on this show that there will be a lot of jobs created by the shore bases, and that those jobs will be clustered in many cases along the Demerara River, where we're going to see a minimum of 8 shore bases developed with thousands and thousands of workers in that area. So it's going to be a massive development area. As a result, you can imagine that houses on the East Bank, there's going to be a lot of demand for houses on the East Bank. You can imagine that. And so if you want to work in a shore base, I imagine you'll want to live somewhere along the East Bank, if you can get yourself as close as possible to some level of transportation. I know East Bank traffic is a monstrous situation. A little bit better now, but still pretty difficult. But if you can find a way to navigate that effectively, that will be a really your best bet. Another thing that we did is we would to save money, we would try and find a roommate. And that is really beneficial, because if you have a roommate, then you can split your costs. What you can do, you can find someone from work, or find someone online that maybe someone from your schooling experience that you can room with, and that allows you to cut your costs substantially. So you get a 2-bedroom and you get a roommate. So the sharing is a very effective way to do that. And one of the things that also we don't do much in Guyana, but which is something that can be really useful, is trying to pick forms of transportation that allow you to, while you're commuting, actually, whether you need to want to watch a movie or check your email or browse the internet, something that doesn't require you to be actively focused on your commute is very useful, because then you can turn your commute into relaxation time, just as if you were at home. Trains, typically in the developed world, are the way that you would best be able to do that. But in Guyana, we don't have a train system. So what I would suggest that might work is you could probably carpool with someone, so that they drive, but maybe you can take turns driving. But that will allow you, while they are driving, to be able to benefit from not having to be completely focused, and therefore to enjoy leisure on the way as you head into work. So that's one way that you can cut costs. Of course, you're carpooling, you're sharing, so you don't each have to have a car, so that helps you to cut costs. But at the same time, it allows you to not lose out time because you have a long commute. You can enjoy leisure during that time. Another advantage of that is that you can live a bit further out, so you can benefit from a lower rent, because you're still able to benefit from the same amount of leisure time, even though you live further away from your office. So that's a little trick that can help to help people to deal with the very difficult costs that we're seeing, very high costs that we're seeing for rental and real estate in Guyana. Just a few quick tips, but essentially we're trying, and we always try on the Lowdown to give you a sense of the direction the economy is going, and how you can position yourself, because it's going to be a wild ride these next few years, fellow Guyanese. And as a result of being a wild ride, we've got to hold on tight and find the best way through. So hopefully this gives you some food for thought. Hopefully you've gotten a sense of what's going on with the inequality in this country. Hopefully you've got a sense of what's going on with the cost of living crisis and what should be done to address it and what's not being done. And from that perspective, you can take that with you and greet the future with optimism and with determination. That brings us to the end of tonight's program. And thank you, as always, for starting your Saturday night on a high with Elson Low here on the Lowdown. And we look forward to seeing you next week for a program and every Saturday night. So thank you again, and you have a good evening and weekend.
Thank you for watching our program. See you right back here, same place, same time. And remember, hold the line of battle, comrades. Our victory is sure.